Hi, everybody. Today we've got another virtual connect lined up for you that should be of interest to many people on the path to licensure. We've got some great presenters today who will share all their expertise. So the title today just officially is called Becoming an Architect, AXP ARE in Colorado Licensure. You'll be able to get one AIA CES learning unit for participating. Our presenters today are your official guides through the licensure process. They've been well trained by NCARB and a lot of other entities to be the experts to know all things about the pathway to licensure, the requirements not just nationally, but in the state of Colorado, to ease your transition from school through internship into practice and licensure. I encourage you to use the chat box to ask questions. We'll have a shared presentation today on the screen, and then we'll get to those questions at the end. Today, our Colorado licensing advisors, Avik Guha and Eric Oakland, will review the steps necessary to achieve licensure and the programs that can help you get the most out of your career in architecture. There have been recent changes to the process from NCARB, some due to the pandemic and others that were already in process, and they'll update us on the latest there as well. So let's bring our presenters on, and I'll start the introductions. First, Avik Guha, AIA. Hi, Avik.
Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Good. Good to see you again, and thanks for all of your service. Avik's our senior licensing advisor. He's a licensed architect and project manager at Roth Shepherd Architects, and previously was an associate at Mackey Mitchell Architects. He's worked on diverse commercial and governmental buildings throughout North America and has volunteered as the AIA and NCARB Colorado State Licensing Advisor for the last 3 years. Prior to this, Avik participated in and chaired the NCARB think tank during different years on a national level. And Avik is handing off his role as advisor to Eric Oakland. Hi, Eric.
Hello, everyone.
Eric's a principal and the director of strategy at Cunningham. He has more than 30 years of experience designing and managing a wide range of project types, from technical laboratories and healthcare facilities to large-scale office and multifamily projects. His focus has been developing urban multifamily projects that contribute to the livable context of the Denver metro area. Eric's been recognized with multiple AIA awards for creative designs, along with other industry awards for interiors and graphic design. And he's been a frequent presenter in our new virtual connect format since we launched it last spring. So welcome back, Eric.
Thank you.
Glad to have you joining us on this volunteer journey to help people on the path to licensure. So I'll bring my video down so you guys can share your full presentation, and we'll reconnect later. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mike. All right, so hopefully you can see my screen here.
Yep.
And so what we're going to do is we will go ahead and cover the 3 E's of licensure and also talk about the specific requirements for the state of Colorado. And as Mike mentioned, we'll also touch on the changes that have been happening during COVID and what that means for the licensure process moving forward. So first of all, most of you probably know this, but what does NCARB stand for? The National Council of Architectural Registration Boards. That is what the acronym means. And it really describes what they do. This is a statement from NCARB's website, but they are a nonprofit made up of the 55 architectural licensing boards. And the key thing to really understand about this mission statement is that each jurisdiction is responsible for regulating the practice of architecture within its borders. What NCARB really does is they facilitate the communication between those jurisdictions and administers national programs that are accepted by those boards so they can communicate better and so that architects can work throughout North America. So the 55 jurisdictions, those are the 50 United States, Washington, DC, Guam, Puerto Rico, Northern Mariana Islands, and the US Virgin Islands. And so once again, each state and territory is in charge of granting licenses within its boundaries, and they have unique rules. And so thinking about that, a lot of times when people get caught in the licensure process, they're usually caught between the jurisdictional rules and they have to see, okay, how does my unique path really fit into this to achieve my goals? And so those are a lot of the questions that we tend to see here. So really understanding where your issues lie is really critical to achieving your path. So as you likely know, architecture is a regulated profession. So Because architecture affects public safety and the built environment, that is part of why we have our advanced education, our practical experience, and our education, our examination requirements. So just the fact that the word architect has legal meaning, that is really what the licensure process is about. It's not about your proclivities for design. It is really about protecting the public health, safety, and welfare. So when you think about it in that way, that is really what they're trying to do, to find that standard of competency. So you can work in an architecture firm without being licensed. And in fact, that is a requirement of the AXP, but you cannot be an architect without completing the licensure process in full in at least one jurisdiction. So the official mission statement for NCARB is to protect the public health, safety, and welfare by leading the regulation of the practice of architecture through the development and application of standards for licensure and credentialing of architects. So that pretty much summarizes what we've just talked about. Once again, they provide those national standards and programs, and those are adopted by the different jurisdictions. So NCARB's been around for about 101 years now. And so before that time, a lot of the jurisdictions just didn't jive together. In today's day and age, where people could be working on projects all throughout the country, it really is critical, since you do need your licensed professional to have the ability to stamp in the jurisdiction that they're submitting their drawings for. So that's really what this is about as far as homogenization of standards. So as we mentioned before, there are 3 keys to licensure, or the 3 E's: education, examination, and experience. And if you're on the path, chances are you're pretty familiar with at least 1 or 2 of these. And we'll go through each one just to understand not only the general traditional path, but also what are the different alternatives that are within our jurisdiction. So on average, the time to licensure, including the 3 components, is about 12.8 years. So you can see here, education almost being 6 years, AXP almost 5, and ARE a little over 2. Based on which path you go, there can be some overlap in how that works, as shown by the diagram. So right now, the graphics you're seeing are from the current NCARB by the numbers publication. And so you can see here some of the numbers for how many students are enrolled in NAB accredited programs, and the different pass rates, the IPAL programs, and the gender gap as well. It's almost pretty even there. So for education, the key here is in the traditional path to earn an architecture degree from a NAB accredited program. So 37 of the 55 jurisdictions require this. If your jurisdiction has an alternate education requirement, like Colorado does, you can go through that if your education is not from a NAB accredited program. So in Colorado, we have alternate paths, and essentially what it boils down to is additional amount of hours logged into your AXP under a licensed architect, and those hours over time will accrue and will substitute essentially for their education requirement. And so, as you may know, there are several alternate programs in the state of Colorado, such as the environmental design degree at CU Boulder. So, you know, really the board has tried to adopt different ways to accommodate programs that are local to our state. Key thing to understand about education, no matter which way you go, you will need to have your transcripts for all undergraduate and graduate education, whether or not it is a NAB accredited program, put into your NCARB profile under the education tab. So that's official transcript over, and they need to be able to verify that for all the jurisdictions through their secure server. So don't forget that either way. In talking about the alternate path, you can see here, this chart is from the state board bylaws and rules. So you can see here, essentially what the hours are going to be if you are using an education alternative based on the degree that you hold. And so as you can see, Bachelor of Environmental Design, Bachelor of Science in Architecture, a BArch, those are all, that's non-accredited. Those are all accounted for here. And you can see that at 7540. And then as different degree programs are there, it's really hard for the board to really homogenize and understand, okay, what's really the content of this? So the amount of hours required to use the alternate path lengthens as you go further up to the path of no degree. And if you just only have a high school education, you'll need 18,800 hours of experience logged in your AXP profile to fulfill the education requirements. So this is a slide that I made for students who really are trying to understand what their degree does, or if they're planning on, do they want to move to a master's degree? Do they want to stick with theirs and enter the workforce? It may not be as valid in this presentation, but it is good to just understand, you know, what are the pros and cons? You know, a lot of it is cost and time when you go for that master's degree. But when you get the master's degree, the actual base AXP hours are less, and concurrent testing with the ARE can happen when you're completing your AXP hours. An additional thing to think about too is that when you're going for reciprocity, and we'll get into that later, if you go through an alternate path, you have to wait for 3 years after your initial license in Colorado before you can go for an alternate reciprocity in another jurisdiction. The reason for this is that the jurisdictions don't want a candidate to come to Colorado or get a Colorado license, and then really what they're trying to do is get a license in another jurisdiction, and then a month later just go around that jurisdiction's rules and get reciprocity. So that's why there's 3 years. They're basically letting you get your training wheels with your Colorado license before they allow that. And so if you have any questions on that, please let us know in the Q&A. So let's go ahead and jump into Experience. To do Experience, you will need to have a My NCARB profile, and you can find that at ncarb.org. And once you start that, you'll be able to log your AXP hours. You can see here some of the stats regarding the AXP, so you can see the amount of candidates that have been reporting experience and the amount of time it took to finish the program overall. So on average, candidates finish this program by around 29 years of age. So regarding experience, all 55 jurisdictions accept the Architectural Experience Program. Some jurisdictions will require additional hours based on older statutes and rules. And just the key thing to know for Colorado, we do not require that. So that 3,740 hours is the base requirement and is Colorado's requirement. So the AXP identifies 96 key tasks that fall into 6 practice areas. And so it's really about ensuring that you have a diverse experience across those areas. So these are the 6 groups, and you may have seen them before if you've already been logging hours. The key thing to understand when you log AXP hours, when you do your reports, is that there's a setting A and a setting O. So setting A is under a licensed architect. So work performed at an architecture firm where you are being compensated. That's a key thing there. Also, a question we get on that often is, can I get experience in a foreign location outside the United States? Yes, you can, if you have a supervisor who is licensed in one of the 55 jurisdictions. So if they hold a license, they are your supervisor, they can sign off on those hours. For setting O, that's experience that can be performed outside of an architecture firm, and there is a limitation to that because they don't want other or alternate experiences to be the bulk of your architectural experience in this program. So there are limitations there, but what's really key to understand here is there are a lot of opportunities to get hours outside of an architecture firm, and that's really critical. And really the setting O came about and became more robust in the 2008 economic downturn. So, you know, really make sure you take advantage of the opportunities because you may already be doing some things that could net you some setting O hours. And hours can be logged online or via mobile in the AXP app. So you can log them similar to what you would do a timesheet. You can do them in bulk, you can do them weekly, really whatever works for your schedule. The key thing you really need to understand is that you want that time to be logged within 6 months and sent to your supervisor, because there is a thing called the reporting window that is really important to meet. Looking at this slide, you can see the diagram in the middle. And really what this means is that you've got 6 months where you can receive full credit for your hours. So as you notice, there is a 2-month lag period that's added there. What does that mean? It really gives your supervisor time if they need time to review it, if they are forgetting to review and approve your hours. It basically just prevents, or it reduces the risk of having your hours lose part of their credit because if your supervisor is just too busy or is not prioritizing reviewing your hours. However, I would caution, do not use that 2 hours or those 2 months to delay and then have an 8-month thing and give your supervisor 2 days to review it. It really is not a smart thing to do. So really keep that 2 months grace in there for your supervisor. And as you can see, if for experience that's older than 6 months, going back to 5 years, you can receive 50% credit for the AXP. So that'll fit in those 96 tasks. One thing to note from Colorado's perspective, if you're backlogging hours in bulk, say, from 3-4 years ago, and you're doing an alternate path, those hours for the Colorado additional hours that we were talking about before, for the education requirement, those will be counted at 100% credit by DORA, or the Department of Regulatory Agencies, so Colorado's board. However, from an AXP standpoint, as far as hitting those 96 tasks, they will only count at 50% credit in NCARB system. So something really critical to note there if you're doing an alternate path. Also something to note, if you have extenuating life circumstances, you can qualify for an extension to your filing period. So birth or adoption of a child, military service based on the time of service, serious medical conditions. It's really case by case. And if you do have that happen to you where it affects your ability to log your hours, reach out to NCARB at their customer service line or call them as soon as you're starting to head into that territory where that may occur. So as we mentioned before, the type A setting, that's experience you gain while employed at an architecture firm with a supervisor who is licensed to practice architecture in the US or Canada. I know the Canada one, that may be a little tricky. I know people always ask about that. And so the CACB in Canada, they're similar to the NAB that we have here, the education folks that we have in the United States. And so work under a licensed architect in Canada in one of their provinces also can count for the AXP. Also, as I mentioned, in other locations as well, if you have a supervisor who holds a license in one of the 55 jurisdictions. So you will need to earn a minimum of 1860 in experience setting A. There is no maximum hours on this. Obviously, if you're working at a firm and gaining that experience, they're not capping that on you. So really the key things here, employed by a firm engaged in the lawful practice of architecture. So legally, they are allowed to be practicing architecture, to call themselves an architect, to be stamping drawings that they are stamping. Your work is supervised by an architect licensed to practice in one of the jurisdictions. You have a high school diploma or equivalent, and you are being paid. So unpaid internships do not grant you AXP hours. So something to think about if you are thinking about going in that direction. Type O setting. So there is a maximum under this, and that maximum is 1860. They don't want more than half of your hours to be from other types of experiences. So types of experiences that can count under setting O. Work under licensed professionals, so structural engineers, MEP engineers. If you're working under those types of professionals who have their PE or professional engineering stamp, you can gain hours in that capacity. Design or construction related employment, so like at a contractor. Community-based design center, collaborative and design competitions, so those offer opportunities where you can do that over the course of your AXP. NCARB's professional conduct monograph, so a few hours here, but it's really about professional conduct and ethics. And so if you complete that and the quiz associated with it, you can get 10 hours from that. Site visits with mentors, so even if it's not your own project, but you're doing site visits and getting that knowledge from a site visit, you can gain some time for that. And AIA continuing education, if it's HSW, you can get up to 20 hours per area for the 6 areas, so up to 120 hours there. We won't get into this exactly, and if you have more questions about logging hours, you can kind of see this graphic here and how that works. So here's a snapshot from my NCARB record. And you can see here, you'd go to the Experience tab and click on Experience Reports. At the top left of that, there is a button that says New Axp Experience Report. And then you'll be brought to a page where you can specify your Axp Experience settings. So if it's setting A, setting O, who's the employer, if applicable, the supervisor, what's your role at the firm, and then what are the start and end dates of that report. So a lot of times people say, okay, I want to do my reporting in a certain amount of time, and you say, I want to do the last 3 or 4 months together. Put those dates, and then the average hours per week, and you can decide if you want to do a weekly or in bulk. And essentially what will happen is you'll log your hours, and then when you're like, okay, I've now logged my hours through the amount of time I want for this report, then you will export it to your supervisor, and your supervisor can review it and approve it. And what I always recommend to candidates is make sure that you do meet with your supervisor. Use this as an opportunity to meet with them, see what experience you need to leverage that, let them know your goals with licensure, and see what can be done to get you those hours you need. So that, I think it's a really critical touch point, and a lot of times people don't take advantage of that. So the Axp is meant to help you get that round experience. So leverage that as best you can.
Yeah, just as a recommendation, just wanted to add, I review about 4 or 5 people currently. And so it's really helpful if they are doing it like every other week or every week. It just helps the supervisor as well. Kind of, they remember a little bit more of the experience that they're signing off on. So as a recommendation, I totally agree with that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Being on the other side.
and something to think about too, maybe it's worth a conversation when you do have your supervisor about what are their expectations, what do they want to see from you, what works with them. I think having that dialogue up front can be really helpful to making that process streamlined. That's a great point, Eric.
Yep.
So jumping over to the ARE, so you can see how many candidates tested in 2019, and a little bit of a drop from the year before. We had about 4,000 candidates complete the ARE. So you can see the amount of divisions taken, and the average time to complete all 6 divisions is about 2.3 years. So average candidate starts testing right before they turn 30. So here's something I get a lot of questions on is, can I get around the ARE? No, you cannot get around the ARE. And in fact, all 55 jurisdictions require that you pass all 6 divisions of the ARE. So some jurisdictions have additional examination requirements. So California has the CSE. Colorado does not have an additional examination requirement. So with a NAB degree, you can log hours with AXP and take your ARE 5.0 divisions at the same time. So for a lot of folks, that's a really great way. They cut back on time, but just note that if you're completing an alternate path, you really must complete all the hours required for that education alternate path, get your authorization to test, and then you can start testing. And we'll talk about the authorization to test in a little bit here. So the ARE 5.0 features 6 divisions. And really the alignments here have to do with the progression around a typical architecture project. And these divisions can be taken in any order. And something that's a little tricky here, and I know a lot of candidates have questions about, well, what's the best order? What's the order that makes the most sense? And ultimately that is up to you and where you are in your career. So if you are working on a lot of schematic design development, programming analysis and project plan and design may make a lot of sense, as you may be able to apply some of your personal experiences to those exams. If you're getting more into construction documents or CA, you can see PDD and CE may be more what makes sense for what you're doing. So it's really something to think about yourself. If you're, for a lot of folks, studying can be very, very difficult to be, to come up with a plan, especially since if you're working full time. And so, maybe talk with friends or work with others about when, if you're taking similar exams, a similar time frame, maybe that can be a way that keeps you on track too. But the idea you can take the divisions in any order sounds great, but it can make it a little hard to prepare and have the motivation or a work plan to go around with it. As I mentioned before, authorization to test is critical. And so Colorado DORA will need to approve your eligibility to test. So if you're following the traditional path, NAB accredited degree, once you've turned in your transcripts, that should almost be automatic, and NCARB will give you that authorization to test. If you're doing an alternate path because it's a state alternate, DORA really has to be the one to sign off and grant that to NCARB to approve that in the system. And regarding exam retakes, exam division can be retaken after 60 days, maximum of 3 times a year from the date of your initial attempt. The reason for the cap is they don't want someone just taking the test over and over and memorizing the test bank. And so just keep in mind, you can still, in that time frame, if you do not pass a division, try another division within that 60 days if you're trying to keep on a certain schedule. So something to think about, definitely not getting pushed back by when that happens, because most candidates will fail a division. That's just usually part of the process, unfortunately. And something you may have noticed is that the 6 divisions that were just on the screen align with the AXP. So as I mentioned before, if your experience is aligning with the exams you're taking, maybe something to consider when making your study plan. So getting a little deeper into the authorization to test, as I mentioned before, if you're going through the traditional NAB education path, just make sure your transcripts are verified. And if you're seeing that you're not given the authorization to test, simply calling NCARB or reaching out to their customer service should fix that pretty quickly once that's in the system. For the non-traditional path, you'll be doing that online, and they actually have it on their application checklist online at DORA's AES, Architectural and Engineering website. And you'll be able to see that you'll be a non-direct registration applicant. Essentially what that means is once you start an application with DORA and you let them know that, it flags it for them, hey, we're going to be the ones authorizing them to test. And so when you get to that, close to meeting your education alternate path, what you can do is make that profile with DORA, and then say that you're a non-direct registrant, and then once you finish the hours and you deem that you are there for their review, you basically submit it through that, and then they'll provide the authorization to test. I will let you know that it is a little tricky at times to get DORA, sometimes to get that in a timely fashion. So as soon as you feel like you got those hours, make sure you send that request, check in every couple weeks with DORA just to see where it's at, if they have any concerns with the experience that you've submitted. Rolling clock extension. So getting back to the exam itself. So this is something that people are always a little confused about, because we have the reporting requirement for AXP, we have the rolling clock for the ARE. And really what it's meant to do is make sure that you're taking the exams in a timely manner, that it's not, information that's now so far past, that it's, as things are changing, as technology is changing, they really want to make sure that you're staying timely with your exams. And so the rolling clock begins as soon as you get your first pass. So when you pass your first division of the ARE, that is the day that your rolling clock begins. And so essentially what happens is that over time, the goal is you need to finish all 6 of the divisions and get the pass for that last one before the first one expires. So it's not that all divisions prior will expire, it's just that first one will essentially hit its shelf life and expire. And so, it is really critical to stay on that within the 5 years, keeping in mind that NCARB may allow an extension to the rolling clock based on similar circumstances we talked about with extensions for the AXP. So once again, birth or adoption of a child, active duty military service, and medical circumstances. And to fill this out, there is a rolling clock extension request online that can be submitted for that. And so something to keep in mind, that this is a change during COVID, since many of the testing centers were closed. Also, many folks, not wanting to compromise their personal health to go into a Prometric center, is that as of March 1st, 2020, all candidates with certain divisions passed already will be granted a rolling clock extension of 18 months. So really critical, I know this has derailed a lot of folks on their path to licensure. And so I think that rolling clock extension, I think is fair, and it really allows for candidates who maybe either stopped studying or did not proceed with any more exams that time that they might need to prevent older divisions from expiring. So this extension should automatically be applied to your account, and you should see that in your experience tab, the validity of that exam score report. And that should be actually current. That should be occurring by the end of May 2021. So if you're not seeing that by the end of this month, it's definitely worth reaching out to NCARB, but it should be automatically applied to all past exams for AXP candidates right now. Jumping over to examination changes during COVID-19. So launched in December of last year, candidates now have the flexibility to test online, and you can schedule online appointments 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So it is, I think, something that's adding more flexibility and something that's great. And this will remain even after, you know, as situation with COVID gets better over time, this will remain. This is not going away. So there are fewer exam questions when doing the online proctoring option. And there are optional breaks that you can take if needed, similar to if you're in a testing center. And if there are different accommodations you need due to a disability or any other accessibility issues, those can be accommodated oftentimes. Just have to reach out to NCARB ahead of time to discuss what those are. The biggest thing to know that has been difficult for candidates is that in both the in-person and the at-home versions of the exam, scratch paper is not allowed. And this has been a very controversial point since it was announced last year. And really what it has to do with is parity from either testing situation. And so they now launched a whiteboard tool where you can type notes, you can draw notes. And while it may not be as personal and easy as picking up your pencil, of course, it does allow you to make the notes that you need. And so what I would say is that before taking any exam divisions online, I highly recommend practicing the whiteboard tool. You can download it for free, you can test it out, and really get to know the ins and outs of how to use it. So highly recommend that moving forward. If you are planning on taking the exam from home, they do have minimum spec advisements on your laptop or desktop that really to be able to run the exam. And so just make sure you check that. They do have a lot of rules. They want to ensure the integrity of the exam and prevent cheating if working or if taking the exam from a remote location. So they really recommend a high-speed internet connection, preferably Ethernet, live audio and visual feed, because the online proctors are watching you while you're taking the exam. And then the ability to download Prometrics testing platform is critical. Keep in mind, you cannot use dual monitors or docking stations. They really need to have that live video feed. There can't be other computers in the way where you can have alternate information or study material on it. Testing materials are not allowed in the room with you. Other people are not allowed in the room with you. So really what's critical is, if you're planning on going this way, please check the requirements online. And even more importantly, what you can do is NCARB allows you to set up a free 30-minute appointment with Prometric to confirm that your space, whether or not you're doing it from home or if you're doing it from a conference room or from wherever, meets that requirement. And you can just have them verbally tell you, yes, here's what meets, here's what you need to fix before you take your exam. And so what we're finding is, you can see here with the gears graphic, the percentage of candidates that have technical issues. So if you go to a Prometric center, 7% of candidates have technical issues. Chances are you or someone has probably had one. Overall, we're finding that 9% of candidates are having that, but online, 18% of candidates who do the online are having some technical issues for one reason or another. So admittedly, I've been advising folks to, unless you really are, it's really concerning for you to go into a testing center. For right now, I do recommend going on site. But if you are wanting to do online, just really check the requirements and make sure that technically everything's good on your end. Also, NCARB understands that there is a potential financial hardship if you don't own a video camera or have one integral to your device. And so if you do need one, you at your first online appointment can get a $50 rebate to purchase a camera that would be compliant with the proctoring needs. So that's a great benefit that you can take advantage of if you do decide to do an online exam. So unrelated to COVID, there is an examination change coming next year. NCARB will be switching over to a new vendor for testing. So currently it's Prometric. It'll be switching to PSI. And part of the reason is due to the issues that have been happening with the online proctoring, really something critical that they want to make sure moving forward is having less of those technical issues. So once they switch that vendor, the PSI is going to be involved with both in-person and online testing. And so for right now, everything is remaining the same. NCARB is working with PSI to make sure that everything is maintaining the continuity. NCARB will release more information later this summer, and in the fall, they'll do all their testing. And then in early 2022, likely they'll announce the launch date. They are expected to provide at least 3 months of notification. Any exams scheduled with Prometric will not be impacted. So do not let this inhibit your study schedule or your path or what you're trying to do. If you're wanting to take an exam and if the system is letting you schedule an exam, you will be able to take that exam. But sometime next year, there will be some changes, and really the exam is going to be the same. It's really the examination locations and the vendor who's executing it and their protocols may be slightly different. All right, so what do you do once you complete the 3 E's? The issue is a lot of folks think, okay, I'm done with everything. That's it. Where's my license? And unfortunately, that's not really how it works, because you do need to go through the legal paperwork. So once you get to that point in time, start your record with the state board if you haven't yet, and fill out the applications that are required. So you can do this at colorado.gov/DORA. And essentially what it is it's going to be confirming a lot of your background information. You have some liability and criminal history, affidavits you have to sign. And so those are just legal documents that do need to be completed. And then once you submit that officially, it can take anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks on average for that paperwork to come through and for you to receive the official documentation that you are licensed in the state of Colorado. However, there are always snags in the system, and I always recommend every couple weeks, check in with DORA via email or phone, or check in with NCARB if it seems like the issues with NCARB. It really is something I know candidates sometimes feel like I don't want to bug them, I just want to, and sometimes things just fall through the cracks. So, always just taking charge and just checking in is really something critical that can prevent prolonging this last step. If you didn't want to see some of our stats here from Colorado, you can see what's going on in the past year with our 3 E's. And so you can see where experience is. So we have 650 candidates reporting hours. We have about 630 active testers. You can see the divisions taken. You can see the completion timeline averages. So we're a little faster on AXP and we're right on target with ARE. So it is something interesting just to keep in mind what's going on in our jurisdiction. And something I say as a licensing advisor, and a lot of, this is probably something NCARB may not love me saying, but, licensure may not be for everyone in their career path and what they want to do. It's very possible it may not be. And ultimately, you have to determine, is that what you want? And what do you want to do with your career? And does licensure help you achieve those goals? Licensure matters to different people for different reasons. But this slide kind of explains, here are some common reasons that it's important to folks. Once you've earned a license, you can call yourself an architect. You can legally stamp drawings. Trust. Your license gives firms, clients, and the public confidence in your skills to meet that competency standard of your jurisdiction, to protect that health, safety, and welfare. Skills. The diversity of the tasks of the AXP and the breadth of what's covered across the ARE divisions. It lets them know you've gone through that rigorous process. And of course, advancement, the ability to use that license to increase your career opportunities and achieve more maybe where you're working right now. Something critical, resources. People always ask about resources, and admittedly, it can be hard to find a lot of testing resources. As far as the path all around, NCARB.org has a lot of free resources on there. So they have overview handbooks, PDF guidelines you can download, discussion forums. They do videos every 2 to 3 weeks, webinars weekly. They have blog articles based on common issues they're seeing. They have the licensing requirements tool, which I'll show on the next slide. The licensing advisors community, where you can ask questions to licensing advisors through all 55 jurisdictions. And then of course the AXP app, where you can log your hours. And AIA Colorado has several resources available. So testing resources that can be checked out for a couple weeks at a time. And in the past, there was the Path to Licensure lecture series, of course, during COVID and before, that has been on hiatus, but it may be something, if there is demand for it, that could start up again in the future. The licensing requirements tool. So this is a tool on NCARB's website. If you type in NCARB licensing requirements tool, it'll jump you straight to this page. And so what you can do here, and what's really great about this visual map, is it allows you to see the requirements of any jurisdiction that you want. And you can either click on your jurisdiction or the state or territory you want to look at their rules, or you can click on the requirement as well. And what's even more interesting, if you're starting in one jurisdiction, but know you're going to end up in another one in the future, you can click both of those jurisdictions, and then it'll show you what requirements are similar or dissimilar on the left side based on if it's highlighted. And then from there, you can click some of these side little information icons, and they will let you know, hey, here's the fine print, or here's the link to those boards' website where you can reach out or find out more about your particular case. So this tool is probably the most critical tool, especially if you have an alternate path, or you're just planning on working somewhere else, or want to understand that whether or not it's initial licensure, reciprocity, or any other topic. And just so you know, licensing advisors community, we are always here to help you navigate your path and really go through those specifics of what you do or what you need to do to achieve your goals. And so, we serve at different levels. There's some at the universities, there's some at the state level, like Eric and myself, and others in the professional realm. And so, use these folks to help you along your way. And as for us, that is the best way to reach us is through the AXP email address. So axp@aiacolorado.org. So really a great way to reach out to us, and you can share with us all of your information about your background and what should I do, or if you need some advice or need to be connected with someone else, that's something that we can definitely assist with. And with that, I want to thank you for your time. For more information, please reach out to ncarb.org. And if you need to reach out to us, axp@aiacolorado.org is the best way to reach us. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks, Avik and Eric. Really informative discussion, and I'm glad you ended with that slide, because I was going to say the most important resource we have for AXP candidates are you. These two gentlemen know the process and have literally raised their hand to sign up to help anyone who asks a question to navigate that. So thank you for all that you do to help pay back something that was given to you along your journey earlier in your careers. And one additional thing I'd like to add is, if you're experiencing economic hardship for any kind, and you're an AIA member on the path to licensure, we have, with the generous support of the Architectural Education Foundation, the Licensure Advancement Fund. It can cover your fees to NCARB during the process, to take the exam, to keep your record active, to get support materials for study sessions, up to $500 in a year for that scholarship fund. So if that applies to you, or you know someone who's in that situation, we do not want to see a quote unquote lost generation of architects. You'll hear this from time to time when there are some tough years economically, and the number of licensure candidates goes down because they just don't have that support from their firms to continue on. So we don't want that to be an excuse if you'd like to keep going on your path to licensure. And then, of course, even though our office is not staffed on a daily basis under COVID, we do have ARE resources in a very extensive library. Any number of study materials from a lot of different publishers. They can be flashcards, books, you name it. We've got those available. You can request those by appointment, borrow them free of charge for our members again, and we look forward to helping you on that journey. So we've got some questions that I want to get to. And one of them goes back to early in your presentation. You were talking about the two settings, right? So Ryan asked, can you also work for a non-US licensed or foreign architect up to a maximum of 1860 hours under setting O?
Yes, that's correct. So sorry, I forgot to mention that. And I know that's for some folks who are thinking about, okay, I've already done this, or I really want to do this for a summer or for a certain amount of time. Absolutely. Just keep in mind that that cap is there. And what will happen is they'll be your supervisor at that time. And so what they'll do is they don't need an NCARB record. No supervisor needs a full NCARB record because the O setting really, it doesn't, there's a lot of folks who will be signing off on hours who maybe aren't licensed architects. So they don't need to create a record. They will need to create a login, and they will have a portal where they'll get a link to an email and some videos about being a supervisor, really understanding what their role is in the process to help you out. And once they receive that information and make a login, then they can go in and view and approve what you need. But yes, Ryan, that's correct, that the 1860 is the cap in the O setting if under a foreign architect.
Thanks. JP just wanted to note that it's not just architecture candidates that are being picked on when they take the ARE by Prometric. He took the lead green associate exam and had a reboot 30 minutes into the test. It's technology. If it were 100%, we would have figured this out by now and found the right vendor. But the biggest thing I can suggest, and my daughter's going through this process right now out in Oregon trying to get licensed, and it's that 30-minute demo, that free check-in where NCARB will assess your system. They'll do, they're not going to invade your privacy or anything like that. They're just going to check your connection, make sure your system specs are up to date, that your room's in good order, that the camera works, that the upload and download speeds are fine, and tell you whether you're set up for success when you do get online to take that test. Because once you're in, you're committed. You're locked into that retake time limit and all kinds of other things. So you want to make sure that you're as well prepared for that test online when you start it. And why not take advantage of that free check-in?
Absolutely.
And that was something that I know you guys had heard about for a while as AXP advisors, is something coming even before COVID happened, as a long-term plan and strategy for NCARB to increase access to the test, because there's really not a lot of testing centers that are officially authorized. So for some candidates, especially from the Western Slope, it might be closer to you to go to another state than to stay in Colorado or take the test. So this was a long-term strategy that NCARB had to increase access for people. And that remote proctoring can happen in your home. It can happen in a firm. It can happen at an architecture school. It can even happen at an AIA chapter office. So we, once we have a fully staffed, all week long office again, we might start offering that as a member service, even in an AIA office. And COVID kind of expedited that by a good year.
Yep.
So that's something that's here to stay. That is not we did this because of COVID and it's going away afterwards, right?
Correct. Yeah, this is something that's been talked about for a long time, because Mike, for a lot of us that live in Denver, this is relatively easy to get to a testing center. But even if you think about, not only folks on the Western Slope or even candidates who are wanting to test, but like are working abroad or something, right? There are Prometric testing centers in several large cities abroad, but the reality is that does someone really want to take a flight to take an exam? That's, you know, it's kind of crazy. You think about driving through weather conditions here in Colorado, kind of upending maybe your whole weekend to do it. And I think that's been an access issue that's been part of the dialogue for some time now. So I think it makes a lot of sense. And you're right, COVID hastened that because they were originally going to have a lot more, they did a lot of testing, but they were originally going to have a lot more time to do that. And then as soon as everything was changing last year, that was really how they said, oh, we really got to get this going. And so, you know, I think that partially also explains some of the technology issues we've been seeing is that, you know, to make sure that we're not disrupting candidates as much as possible. That's really where they were approaching it from. And so, you know, I've definitely heard some horror stories about the from home, and I've heard folks say they think it's great. They're like, I'm never going to go to a testing center again. Why would I waste my time and gas, and or if I don't have access to transport, why would I waste my time on it? So, but yeah, it's something to think about. And I see here, JP said, I love taking the exam at home. I was able to restart the dropped exam after 25 minutes. So I assume you're talking about your lead GA in this case, but you know, it's the same testing platform. So, you know, it really could happen on any exam. But, you know, it seems like if we're seeing 18% of tests having issues, just know that if you're taking 6 divisions, you know, just get your stuff right the first time with your environment, and you'll set yourself up for success, like Mike is saying.
So Eric, with the candidates you're supervising, how has their behavior changed in the last year or so about, you know, pursuing both obtaining credit under AXP or maybe signing up for exam sections? Have they kept on the same pace, or have things changed?
No, things have changed. I think it was a real concern about COVID and testing places. So I saw a sharp decline, and just now starting kind of people retaking or, you know, starting to take certain sections that they haven't in the past. But I've seen a lot of people kind of hold off on that testing because of that. They're all excited about the switch to the at-home test. I don't think any of them have tried it quite yet. And you know, recording hours, they've really kept on top of things. Maybe that's just being at home and having, you know, access to the computer and work more often, but yeah, a lot more reporting with hours. And you know, just I'm sure everybody's kind of in the same boat. It's like construction visit, you know, CA time is the one thing that's, you know, that's always lacking for younger people, but it's really lacking currently just because a lot of concerns about visiting job sites with COVID. So those are the 2 impacts that I see over the past year.
Yeah, that's a great point that I hadn't considered before. It might not be as readily accessible to get to those construction sites and earn those hours.
Yeah, it's tough. You know, it's funny. I'm really anxious for the at home to really take off with PSI as well. So I have to travel to Albuquerque in 3 weeks to take a test, just to get to a PSI testing center that's approved. So
Wow.
I feel the pain too.
Yeah. And that's the exact same process, right, to register for the online, the remote proctoring. There's no difference in the registration fee or anything like that.
As far as the fee, it is identical. The registration, you of course will have to, it works a little differently in the portal. So essentially, once you have your authorization to test and you're scheduling that test, you know, the testing center has limited number of spots, and if you know, some of them, depending on jurisdiction, may have spacing rules still in effect, and so you're subject to the limitations of the physical testing center and staff capabilities at that time. With your online testing, it's really a bit more fluid, and so there's testing times just all over the place. So the way you'll sign up for the exam is through the same portal, but up front, the first thing you select is really going to be the site you're taking it at, or are you doing it online and at home? So that's really the main change to how it works.
Those on-site testing facilities fluctuate in their capacity limits as, public health guidelines shift. So they could be as high as 100%, as every seat's open to we're shut down because there was a surge in cases. And even with that, when they went to 50%, there was still some hesitancy about, I'm not sure if I want to sit shoulder to shoulder with somebody for many hours in a stressful environment taking the exam. So it's just a great option to be able to have something else to choose if depending on what you're used to and what you're comfortable with.
It's the future for sure.
Yeah, there was, and it's it's going to have another one of these milestone moments, right, where people used to say we could only take it once or twice a year, and we all had to pack into this big room for 2 days straight. So that went away when they went to multiple exams that you could sign up for any time. And now this is going to be another one of those. Well, I remember back in the day when you couldn't take it online.
Oh yeah.
You referenced the alternate path through the Boulder program. So that is more linear in the sense that you can't take the exam sections concurrently with your AXP. But I think in both cases, isn't it true that you can earn credit as you are pursuing your education? So that is not a degree AXP then exam. It's just that AXP and exam is progressive rather than parallel.
Correct. So if you're imagining someone who is still at the university and then needing or they're doing summer internships or things like that, absolutely. That's it's in my mind, it's kind of encouraged if you have the opportunity to do that, to get some of that real world experience in between. It's great. Really, the biggest limitation there is logging the hours. And so I know some candidates, especially financially, students may say, hey, I don't know if I want to start the record yet, just because of the cost. And so some folks, they say, well, I'm years out from really being done with my master's and pursuing, the bulk of my AXP hours. Is it worth it? And really each person has to decide that for themselves. If they want the hours from a certain duration of time, sometimes what I tell candidates who are concerned about that and they say they want the hours, I say, well, then maybe what you do is work the full summer and then, you have that 3 months and 2 months later, and then give, at month 5, then start your NCARB record. And so you catch the tail end of the AXP there and get that full credit and delay that payment a little bit or plan for it.
Yeah, but do keep good paperwork along the way, like Eric said, so you don't forget it and your supervisor knows what they're signing off on.
That's true. You should also talk to your supervisor, because if you don't work there anymore, they need to A, remember who you are, and B, have an idea of what on earth you did.
Yeah. Well, I want to, the last question I'll ask is if you guys could say in your mind, kind of remind people the difference between a mentor and a supervisor. They're technically 2 different roles, although one person can serve in both. And what qualities that candidates would want to look for in those folks.
For sure.
I was going to say, as a supervisor, I think one of the great qualities is like a really strong technical background, just for the experience. I think this is the reason why I love architecture. Man, it really combines kind of an artistic and a technical aspect, and it has both. But as a supervisor, having a strong technical background would helps in careers tremendously.
Absolutely. And I would say, for the supervisor, I'd say for both, what you're looking for is someone who on some level cares about your success. I think that really matters. Now, granted, if you're working at a firm where they don't, or you feel that they don't, that may be a little tricky. But if you have options and you're thinking about who do I work with these folks pretty often, you have a choice. Think about who really understands your motivations and what you're trying to do with your career and what have you worked on. And, I think that's a really, a great way to think about it if you have that opportunity. And, really the supervisor, I would say also someone who's timely. a lot of times, they've now built in the 2-month grace period, but there was a time where that recently that didn't exist even, I think, a couple of years ago. And so, someone who, supervisors are busy. I mean, firms are busy all the time. And, it's, they're really wanting to make sure that the supervisor makes time for you, has those reviews with you. And so if it's someone who you feel like, oh, they care enough about my path or what I'm doing, or know my history a little better, will, maybe listen when I'm saying I'm missing some of these types of hours, or what can we do about this? I think that's really critical. Mentors, a lot of times the reason why mentors are this, you don't actually have to have one technically. It's not a requirement in any part of licensure. But the reason the mentor's there, it's someone who can give an outside perspective. Maybe someone who's not literally signing off on your hours and following you in your path as closely, but someone who, based on their own personal experience, their own path, their work experience, can advise you more on a career level about what you're trying to do. And so I think it's good to have those diverse, perspectives, right? I think people bring to the table what they've, how their career's been and what led them to where they are now. But getting that diversity in who you consult, I think always helps with decision making and thinking about your future.
And if you're tuning into this today and feel like you really need a mentor, and that step's been missing from you, let us know. We don't want you to go through this process alone. Not only do you have access to the AXP advisors and hopefully a supervisor already lined up, but it is great to have someone who has another perspective that's with you every step of the way and urging you through that process, even if they don't have a direct stake in your employment. Just taking a personal interest in you is something to know that there's somebody out there who has your back, and we've got a lot of senior practitioners who would love to give back to you. So if you don't have that role assigned yet, please ask. We'll make sure to find somebody for everybody. Thanks again, Eric, Avik. Always great to see you and hear what's going on in this path to licensure, ever evolving, although I think 5.0 is here for a while. The alignment of the sections with the experience areas is here for a while. Those are all good things that streamline the process and make it easier to navigate. And we'll check in with you again once things change, and hope that people stay in contact whenever they have a question or a concern. We'll see you again on our future virtual connects. I don't want to use a bad pun and say they're virtually every Wednesday, but they're almost every Wednesday for AIA Colorado on a variety of subjects. So check out our calendar online for more, and have a great week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.